We need to stand up to Iran, and we need them to behave like a normal country. That means ending their nuclear program, ending their long-range ballistic missile program, the stopping of hostage-taking, and, of course, their malign behavior where they are inspiring terrorist groups, resourcing and directing them all the way from Africa, across the Middle East, and into Afghanistan.
Well, that was Defense Secretary Mark Esper just a few moments ago on this program talking about the two-day crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, the siege outside the compound ending after pro-Iran militiamen cleared the area there. But U.S. officials remain on high alert with the Pentagon sending in hundreds of troops. Congressman Lee Zeldin, serving on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, joins us now. Congressman, good morning to you. Welcome back to America's Newsroom. First, your thoughts on what you heard from the Defense Secretary a few minutes ago.
His words were appropriate. The actions have been appropriate and proportional. We saw Marines immediately deploying up to help solidify the embassy in Baghdad. We also saw the Ready Battalion from the 82nd Airborne Division head overseas. In the middle of these actions outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, there were images of 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers leaving Fort Bragg and C-17s over the Atlantic, heading to the region. It's important to send a message to an adversary to let them know what options we have. And as we've seen over the course of not just years, but decades and generations in our country, I mean, look at Normandy over 75 years ago. There was that first unit, there was that first wave, and they were effective. And there also was a message, a powerful message that ended up getting sent, where it was unit after unit after unit after unit, wave after wave after wave after wave of options, where for the United States of America, losing isn't an option. So where you have that threat being placed not just to U.S. troops inside of an embassy, but also to U.S. diplomats inside that embassy, which is sovereign territory of the United States, we're absolutely going to defend them at all costs.
Congressman, it's an interesting point that both the Defense Secretary made and you're making a little bit in terms of this buildup that is going to happen here and a show of force, et cetera. Look back in history over the past 40 years. Iran has never really acted like a normal country. The couple of times they have was not because of a show of force. It was because of an act of force by the United States. When is the time to stop talking, as everybody seems to be doing, and start acting against the people who have tried to take over the U.S. Embassy, who shot down our drone, who are mining tankers?
Yeah, I mean, there are, so when you talk about the maximum pressure campaign, we have primarily four instruments of national power: diplomacy, information, military, economics. For there to be change within Iran, this is not something that the United States wants to and necessarily should shoulder that burden on our own. Secretary Esper spoke earlier about the international community stepping up more. That's important. But it's also important for those millions of Iranians inside of their country who want a better future for their nation to take control of their own destiny on their own. It's their nation, not ours. But we're going to protect our troops. We're going to protect our people. I was just last week, as you mentioned earlier in the program, throughout the CENTCOM area of operations, where we have troops not just in Iraq but elsewhere focused on the Iranian threat. A threat on land, it's a threat at sea, it's shipping routes, it's making sure that the Straits of Hormuz are open for shipping, and the Straits al-Bandab, and what's going on in Yemen with the Houthis. And the Iranian threat is one that they're really financing Assad in Syria, they're propping up Hezbollah in Lebanon. So our actions towards Iran isn't just a message being sent as far as what that military option looks like, conventional to unconventional, but in real time what we're doing to be able to help other Middle Eastern countries protect against destabilizing their region, and one country to the next and one threat to the next, ensuring that the good guys are winning, because there really is a new sheriff in town, and it's more than just withdrawing from a fatally flawed Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA. but it's one that needs to be multifaceted. But at the end of the day, to the first point that I made, the best case scenario is for millions of Iranians to take control of their own destiny and not expect the United States to do it for them.
We will see what happens in the hours and days to come after all of that. Congressman, want to move on to what we have been seeing right here back at home in New York City, a wave of anti-Semitic attacks almost every day leading up to the end of the year. A man assaulted by another man using anti-Semitic slurs in New York City, December 23rd. Every single day up till yesterday, again, a man verbally and physically assaulted by two women here in New York City. The New York Times editorial board takes this on in a headline this morning, March Against Anti-Semitism. In it, they write, Jews are being attacked on the streets of New York. New Yorkers can't stand for that. What is called for now is a mass show of solidarity and rejection of anti-Semitism. To protect us all, New York needs to show up against anti-Semitism. We need to march in the streets together. As a New York congressman, I know that you met with the president on this. You spoke to President Trump about how to identify this problem and what to do about it. What's the answer?
Well, what we saw a couple of weeks ago with the president, he signed an important executive order to combat anti-Semitism. There are so many different options. I think what's important for any elected official, for any community leader, especially those who are in and around New York City, it's not just about identifying what one option is that they can do to help, but identifying what all of the options are that need to be done in order to assist. So first off, you have some elected officials and community leaders inside of New York City who are still silent. That's problem number one. Wherever there's anyone who can be speaking up to help stand up and crush what's going on, to identify the threat in order to eliminate it, that's important. You have some elected officials who will associate with the likes of anti-Semitic activists such as Linda Sarsour, Tamika Mallory. There were two women's marches at the beginning of 2019. There was the one that associates with anti-Semites and the one that doesn't. So it's important with some of those relationships that you have of some of these elected officials.
Congressman, to
combating
that point,
BDS. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the reaction of the lawmakers you're talking about would be different if the perpetrators of these anti-Semitic attacks were members of the white nationalist movement rather than the member of groups that they are?
There is a 100% likelihood that if the attackers were wearing Make America Great Again hats instead, you would see a much more robust, vocal, not just local, but national response flipping out over what's going on. And right now you're seeing more of a targeted response, and some people are silent, and that's a problem. In order to crush these threats with anti-Semitism, you have to be willing to identify it. And that's why opposing BDS is an issue on not just on college campuses. You have young kids who aren't able to get to school safely. You have people who aren't able to worship safely. Protecting religious freedom is important. And what happened just north of New York City in Rockland towards the end of Hanukkah, where people observing a Hanukkah party inside of a home, individuals having the right to be able to protect themselves. And I would also say to shame these people who are committing these acts. Let's put their mugshots up and set an example so that people know that if it's just an attack on one Jewish person on a street, that they're going to become nationally known for all of the wrong reasons. I mean, I'm just starting to brainstorm what really are 1,000 options that all should be pursued, as opposed to just trying to find one to check a box.
Yes, Congressman Lee Zeldin, we'll have you back soon. Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.